Welcome back, scholars. This is lesson 6-2.3, The Renaissance Man. Today we're going to really look at one individual in particular who helped to embody the Renaissance and what this was all about. But first, let's learn a little bit about the foundations of his particular area of expertise and fame. Let's take a look at art. See, the Renaissance was really known for bringing art to life. Renaissance artists and writers, they really wanted to show the world the way it truly was. And I want to highlight these two images here for a moment. Here we have two pictures that represent the same thing. This is the Madonna and Child, or Mary and Jesus. Here we have a pre-Renaissance painting that doesn't really focus on getting all the details right and showing life the way it really was. That wasn't the focus of art. That wasn't the purpose of art. It was just to focus on the spirituality of it. Notice the halos around their heads being an important feature of this painting. Now, when you look at a Renaissance version of the same, we see two very human figures. And a lot of the other, notice there's no halos here. Those are all stripped, not from all Renaissance arts, but from a lot of it, to show the reality of life and not simply to focus on the religious aspect of it. Now, this aligns, of course, very well with the humanist philosophy. The humanists wanted to focus on life on earth, and life on earth is very important, and worry about heaven at a later time, or that might be overselling that point. They were definitely concerned about heaven, but they did not want to ignore the importance of life on earth. Now, within these humanists and within this particular set of people, you have a certain number of artists and writers who do an incredible job of really expressing the world. And they do it in a way that nobody had seen before. And they were seen to have had a special gift, that these were special individuals for their ability to show the world for the way it is. And they came up with a special term for these people. They called them geniuses. And this is where that term comes from. It is born out of the Renaissance to refer to people with this special gift to understand the world. They're genius. Now, before we get into our main focus of the day, I want to take a quick little sidetrack, and we're going to look at a writer before we get into our other Renaissance man. Now, Renaissance writers, in the Middle Ages, where the Renaissance came from, all writing was religious or history. It had a very specific purpose. You were recording events that happened, or you were trying to have a religious message. This was what writing was for, to record history and to convert or purify or teach religion to others. Now, on top of that, all literature of the Middle Ages was written in Latin. Now, here we're talking mostly about Western Europe. So we're talking about Italy, we're talking about France and England, and these were all writing in Latin. They were not writing in Italian, French, and English. It was all written in Latin, and very few people could read it. Mostly we're just talking about priests and individuals in the church. Occasionally you might have a scholar who's connected with a government who's not necessarily connected to the church. But really we're talking about mostly members of the church are reading these histories and these religious texts. Until we have Dante. Now, Dante wasn't the first, but he's the first to really become famous and be very good at this. Dante would write stories in Italian that were not history and were not necessarily religious, although Dante definitely angled a lot of his work, especially his most famous work, Dante's Inferno, had a very religious context to it. But it also had these humanist elements. And then we have Chaucer writing in English, and his Canterbury Tales tell the story of these different people in England. And it's not history, and it's not strictly religious. And they're writing in their own language so that the average person can read and understand it. And this is a very important change from medieval writing. Now, these characters that could be related to become key. When you're talking about religious writing, you're talking about saints and apostles of Christ. And if you're talking about histories, you're talking about kings. They would write stories such as the Canterbury Tales, where a key character is a miller, somebody who grinds grain into flour. This is not a glamorous individual, and yet they have a place in the writing of the Renaissance. The writing that is talking about the world the way it is, the real world, the world people live in. And Chaucer's writing in English. So a miller could pick up a book and read about a miller as the main character. And this was interesting and fascinating, and people loved this. Now, probably the best known writer of the Renaissance is considered by many today to also be one of the greatest writers of all time, and that is William Shakespeare. And he lives in England during the Renaissance. And he was very good. He was, by many accounts, the greatest. Shakespeare, you're getting a little, have some modesty there, Shakespeare, okay? To be or not to be the greatest, you were pretty great. You're pretty great. There might be better out there. I'm not going to judge. Now, Shakespeare is able to write a lot of different genres. He writes tragedies. Tragedies are stories that end badly. He writes comedies, which are hilarious. No, they're not. Comedies are stories that end well. They have happy endings. If you want to find some funny Shakespeare, look at some of his tragedies. They're hilarious. He also writes history and poetry. He's not as well known for those. His comedies and his tragedies, especially his tragedies, this is what he is known for. So check out some Shakespeare. It's really worth your time. Yeah, okay. Go ahead and quote yourself a little bit more, Shakespeare. That sounds great. Yeah, everybody loves you. Okay, moving on, Shakespeare. So he's a humanist. And he does follow suit with the idea of humanism. Realistic portrayals, fascinating characters that have really, even now, hundreds of years later, have seeped their way into our popular culture. There are phrases that come from Shakespeare that you haven't, maybe you haven't even read Shakespeare, but you're familiar with certain phrases. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Well, you know, that's Shakespeare. Oh, that's Leonardo DiCaprio. Hey, congratulations on your Oscar, by the way. Nice job. But yeah, these characters, they've become a part of Western culture. Everybody knows who Romeo Montague is. Everybody knows of William Shakespeare, even if they don't know William Shakespeare. Quick note on the little Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? English of the time, wherefore, actually means why. It's wondering why Romeo is a member of that family. And anyway, talk to your English teacher. It's an interesting story there. I'm not going to dwell on it, though. Instead, we're going to talk about how the fact that thanks to this man, Johann Gutenberg, everybody gets to start reading this stuff. He's going to take an invention that we've talked about in a previous unit, the Chinese woodblock printing. And he's going to advance this in a very important and dramatic way. And he's going to start making movable type for printing presses in a very modern sense. And he can start producing books of a high quality very quickly. This printing press is going to quickly lead to the spread of printed books throughout Europe. And all of a sudden, there are printed books everywhere. Books were very expensive. They were very labor intensive because somebody had to hand copy every single book, usually a monk. And this would be how monasteries made their money. They would sell these books. They were very expensive. If you owned even a small number of books, a dozen books or so. You had to be wealthy to afford that. Now, all of a sudden, the printing press is there, and the middle class can afford to own a few books. And pretty soon it will be that they can own many books. The cost of books goes down, and literature becomes affordable. And people start to read Dante, and they read Chaucer, and they read Shakespeare, and this stuff gets reproduced and reproduced and reproduced. And you wind up getting book lovers of the world. Literature. Great stuff. Now, let's talk about the man, the Renaissance man. Leonardo da Vinci is going to occupy the rest of this lesson, and we're going to circle back to him a few times in the next couple lessons, because Leonardo da Vinci is the perfect example of a Renaissance man. And we talk about the Renaissance period, have this man's crotchety old face in your brain, because he is the Renaissance man. A little bit about him. Da Vinci was born in Italy in 1452. Little known fact, he was actually born as an old crotchety man. No, he wasn't. But was born in Italy in 1452. So we're talking about a high Renaissance in Italy. It's been going for about 100 years. We've got Lorenzo de' Medici. He's in Italy at this time. Well, he's in Italy at this time. He's awfully young at this time, but he's there. And so Da Vinci gets born into an existing Renaissance. True to form, he is a full Renaissance man. He's an artist. He's a scientist. He's an engineer. He's an inventor. He's got all this stuff down. I mean, the man is everything. Well, all right. So Leonardo was not actually a Ninja Turtle. He was everything except for a Ninja Turtle. He didn't quite have that going for... Oh, wait. Okay. Secret identity. Leonardo da Vinci is actually Leonardo da Ninja Turtle. Okay. Learned something new today. Cool. Well, what is Leonardo da Vinci known for other than fighting crime as an awesome Ninja Turtle? Well, he's really well known for his paintings. He didn't do a whole lot of them, but this is some of the stuff that he's most famous for. The Last Supper right here is one of his most famous paintings, but the most famous painting is without a doubt his Mona Lisa. This painting right here is the most recognized painting in the world. And actually, the model for who was Mona Lisa is something of a mystery for historians. Many people say it's actually a self-portrait of Da Vinci, where he turned himself into a woman. I don't know, maybe it's possible. She's not quite as crotchety and old as him, but I guess he wasn't always old. Another, though, theory, which I find interesting, is that it might be Isabella d'Este, who we learned about in a previous lesson, might have been the inspiration for this. But in any case, somewhat of an open mystery. But that is Leonardo's Mona Lisa. His paintings do catch the attention of King Francis I of France. Francis I of France. I love that combination. Francis I of France. Francis I of France. Francis of France. Yeah, makes sense. He becomes a big fan of Leonardo's. Leonardo da Vinci is actually convinced to go to France and lives in France for his dying days. This is actually a artist rendering the death of Da Vinci with Francis I right there with him as he dies. This is not itself a Renaissance painting. It was done hundreds of years later, but it's meant to show that moment and how much Francis did care for Da Vinci. Now, Francis cared enough about Da Vinci that he ushers the Renaissance right into France. And France really does well under the Renaissance. And Francis I and Da Vinci are really responsible for this. But other areas of, rather than just art, are very key to who Leonardo da Vinci was. He leaves behind lots of scientific notebooks. He is a scientist at heart, and we've got all of this stuff that he left behind. He carefully recorded his observations of the world. Imagine there's an L in that right there. right there. There should be an L. Observations of the world, including his dissection of human corpses. This was very taboo at the time. You weren't supposed to cut up these bodies, but Da Vinci's like, well, we got to learn a little bit more about the world we live in and our human bodies, and let's see what they're all about. And he takes some pretty graphic notes on some of the dissections that he's done. It's because of these dissections that people gain an increased knowledge of anatomy and understanding of the world. And it really pushes this forward so that a couple hundred years later, dissections of human bodies are a regular thing in order to learn and to teach about who we are. Additionally, some cool stuff to leave you with today. He also kind of came up with a number of ideas that weren't officially invented until long after his death, but he came up with ideas such as submarines and how that might possibly work. Flying machines, helicopters and airplanes and gliders, a rudimentary style of machine gun. Long before they were actually invented, Leonardo da Vinci was trying to imagine how these things might be possible. A true Renaissance man. We're going to learn about a couple more Renaissance men coming up. But I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I will see you next time.